Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for watching. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Today we're talking about a subject that I really like to talk about, so I'm going to try to not talk about it for that long, and that is digital color. So I want to talk about color theory, how colors work together. I also want to show you all some different things when it comes to implementing color onto your websites and different things that you can do for that. Some things that make life a little bit easier when you're trying to come up with, say, a color palette. I also have a pretty neat little demo to show you all here in just a little bit. All right, so lots to do today, so let's jump right into it. When we're talking about digital color, we're talking about something called the RGB color model, or the red, green, blue color model. And so in the RGB color model, those are our primary colors, red, green, and blue. So you probably remember back when you were in, say, kindergarten, right? And you were sitting down and you were first learning to mix paints together and come up with new colors. They told you, here are the primary colors. They are red, blue, and yellow. And you would be able to take blue and yellow and make green, and red and blue and make purple, and red and yellow and make orange. And that's how that works, right? That's something that we call the... that is a different color model than what we're seeing when we're seeing digital color on a screen. That is what we would term a subtractive color model. When you're taking dyes or paints or something and mixing it together to make new colors. That's subtractive color. And even that, right, isn't quite right in terms of subtractive color, because real subtractive primaries are what you'd see if you opened up your printer and you looked at the ink cartridges. Right there, cyan, magenta, and yellow. Just, you try explaining cyan and magenta to 5-year-olds. Right, red and blue, a whole lot easier to explain. And so the color model that our computer uses, the color model that any digital screen uses, is an additive color model, or an RGB color model. And so in this color model, our primaries are not cyan, magenta, and yellow. They are red, green, and blue. And the way things work here to make new colors is super different than a lot of stuff that we're kind of used to. Right? And so it is additive color mixing because we're taking different wavelengths and different intensities of light, and we are adding them together to get our colors. Right? And you see this little graphic here in the lower right-hand portion of my slide there. That's sort of demonstrating that. In a physical class, this is actually the point where I bring my flashlights to class. I have red, green, and blue flashlights that you can kind of adjust and make brighter or dimmer. And you can take and you can shine them up on the wall, and you can actually see this happen in person. Right? And you can see my primaries being the big swaths of color there, the blue, the green, and the red. And in between those areas where the two primaries mix, we see our RGB secondary colors, which in this case are kind of familiar here, right? Because they are cyan, magenta, and yellow. And so we can see here in an additive color mixing process, equal parts blue and green make cyan, equal parts red and blue make magenta, equal parts green and red make yellow. And if we mix all three equivalently, you see what we see in the middle there, which is pure white light, right? Like that's something else that you've probably gotten from, previous earth science classes, life science classes, the fact that light is a spectrum and that you can take white light and you can run it through a prism and it breaks it apart into its different components and this and that. Right, so that's essentially what we're doing here, right? Is just we're going, instead of going into the prism and coming out into different colors, we're taking different colors and putting them together to get white light. And so when we're looking at this, what we're seeing here is that white light is basically all of the colors in full intensity. And then darkness is what we see on a screen as black. So if we have black on a screen, that basically means there is an absence of light of any kind. Whereas if all three of our red, greens, and blues are full intensity, we get white light. And then we can also get shades in between. Right, and we'll kind of see some of that here in just a few minutes. But most of the time, what we see with RGB color models is the RGB triplet. So we see red, green, and blue represented as 3 individual numbers. So we have a red value, a green value, and a blue value. And so we could see that exhibited in the same way that we see the RGB values here on this MS Paint color palette. Right, we see red 155, green 109, blue 214. Or we could see them represented as hexadecimal values. And so let's pull off the side of the road here for just a minute and talk about hexadecimal values. So you're probably used to seeing color represented on the internet in a sequence of 6 characters, maybe something like hashtag. Let me just pull something out of my head here for a minute. I've got this nice kind of periwinkle blue here that's on my browser theme. So let me see if I can guess and see how close I can get to that. So that's almost full blue. That is a little bit of red. There's some green in there too to brighten the whole thing up. So let's say this is something like 5A 40 AF. Right, let's just try that out. Might be wrong, I'm just kind of throwing a number out here. Right, and so what we see here is we see 6 characters after this hashtag here at the beginning. But what we're actually seeing is 3 pairs of numbers. Right, we have our red pair. We have our green pair. And we have our blue pair. And so each of these pairs of numbers range from 00 to FF, and that corresponds to numbers from 0 to 255. So 255 is full intensity. We'll call that full on. And 0 is just off. Right? So if I put 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, then that's black. But we can get these different values here by doing some simple calculations. These are hexadecimal values. That means that's base 16. That means we use 16 characters to represent a numerical value. So in this case, what we would essentially say is instead of this, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's what we're used to, right? And then we're used to going 10, 11, 12, 13. But with hexadecimal, we go A, B, C, D, E, F. Right? So we run out of numbers, so we start using letters to represent our numbers 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Right? Because those numbers technically don't exist, right? 11 doesn't exist. It's a 1 in the ones place and a 1 in the tens place. So if we need to represent it as a singular character, we need to come up with something new. And so each of these octets, or each of these pairs of this sextet, work in the exact same way. So if we looked at, say, the 5A here, and let me write this value down so I can keep referring to the same value. If we look at 5A, we see two numbers in two different places, right? If we are using a different numbering system, we're using the place value to the numbering system to the power of the place value. Right? So since this is base 16, this is 16 to the 0. And this is 16 to the 1. Right? And so if we were to take this and convert it into decimal, all we would have to do is take the value of the character at that position, multiply it by the place value, and then add them together. Right? So in this case, we have an A, and A represents a 10, right? It goes 9A, so that would be 9, 10. In this case, we are at 16 to the 0. Anything raised to the power of 0 is 1. So this value right here in the ones place is a 10. Then in our 16s place here, that's 16 to the 1. Anything raised to the power of 1 is itself. We have 5 here. 5 times 16 is 80. We have 5 in our 16s place, 10 in our 1s place. 1 times 10 is 10. 5 times 16 is 80. We add those two values together, and that is 90. And so we want to think about where that kind of ranks on our scale from 0 to 255. Because this is the intensity of that color value in terms of what we're mixing. So what we're looking at here for our red value is a little under halfway. Our green value then was 40. 0 times 1 is 0. So that first one is 0. 4 times 16 is 64. 64 plus 0 is 64. So if we look on our scale here, we say this this line here is 90, so 64 would be about right here. So we have a little more red than green, so it'll be a little more on the purpley periwinkle side of things. But we add this intensity to it to make the color a little bit lighter. All right, finally we have our blue value, which is AF. F in this case is 15. 15 times 1 is 15. We'll put that 15 there. A, we've already said, is 10. So 16 times 10 is 160. 160 plus 15 is 175. So if we were to put that on our scale here, it would be up toward this end. Right, and so these are the different intensities of light kind of mixing together. You know, think about the example of the flashlights that I gave earlier. You know, if I had my blue flashlight on really bright, my green flashlight on really dull, and my red flashlight on somewhere in the middle, then that's what we're kind of looking at here. So what does this color actually look like? You know, I was just kind of guessing here based on, you know, the color that I see in my browser. Could be wrong, right? I didn't check this beforehand. So let's see what this looks like on a site. I have a VS Code window here already ready for us. And I want to do something just a little bit different for the purposes of this demonstration. And I want to actually have live editable CSS on my site, which is kind of cool. All right, so what I want to do is I want to put my style in the head here. So this is going to be style type equals text / CSS. And in any HTML element, I can add a content editable tag, like so. It is a Boolean tag, so its presence allows it to be true. This is our content editable tag, and this will allow me to edit my CSS from the page, which will be kind of cool. You'll see what I mean when we get there. I do have to show my CSS on the page, though, so I'd want to take my head tag, and I'd want to take my style tag, and I'd want it changed to display block. And now I can open up this website on my live server. And if we look at this site here now, we can actually see there's my HTML here in the header. And I can actually go in here and change it. Right, so I can actually go in here and add a body. And I can add that color. So if we're changing the background color of something, it would be background-color. And we'll do hashtag 5A 40 AF semicolon. And now when I click off of that, that should update. Let's try to maybe do this. There we go. Get rid of those spaces in there and it gets us close. Now we can see this color here was the one I was going for. I got pretty close. Not too far off, right? But we can start to see like, oh, well, that's a little more red than I wanted. Right? So I can cut a little bit of red out of here. Alternatively, I could also add a little bit of green in here as well. So let's try that, because I do want it to be a little lighter. Let's try adding a little bit of green in here and change this to say for F. And that gets us a little bit closer, which is pretty good. Maybe we change that blue value. Something like CC, right? Make it a little more blue. Make it even more blue, CF. Right, now we can see, well, maybe I can cut out some red from here. I'm getting pretty close. Right, so you can see as I change this, it's changing the background color, and I'm trying to get close to that color here. Let's cut out some red. Let's make it the exact same as the green here, and let's try 4F. And that's actually really, really close. You know, the more I look at it, the more I think there might be actually a little more green in that than red. So what if I add a little bit more green to it? Like, let's say we added, say, 5-3 in green. Even closer. What if we made everything a little bit higher, right? Like, let's say we did 5-3, 5-7, DD. Well, now we've gone a little too far, maybe, right? It's a little too light now. Or actually, I still have CF here, so let's get rid of that. There we go. Getting pretty close. Right, and we could kind of tweak that and play with that until we got right on. But you can kind of see how the color kind of works here, right? Like, as I change the different values, it's going to add more intensity of red or more intensity of green or more intensity of blue, and mix and match and change that color accordingly. Now, something that's kind of interesting is that basically any word that has the characters A through F in them, I can use as a color name. Now, there are certain named colors, right? And that's something that you've probably looked at in some other classes, that there are some named colors that just exist. Here's the chart. Or no, this is the WebSafe color chart. This is not the named colors. Too many windows open. Let me find that named colors chart over here. Color names. There they are. So these are the named colors, and these are colors with a name. So I can go through and I can use Indian red, and Indian red refers to that specific shade of red. And it also comes with this hex code or these RGB values. Right? If you don't want to use the hex code, you could also use the RGB value. Just straight up. And so these are safe named colors. If you use these names, you will get these colors. But you can also use any word with the letters A through F in them, and you'll get some kind of color. Like if I came in here and I made this background color #Apple, it should give me some sort of color. And this one might be a little bit too light. The popular one that everybody does is the one that's Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris is a color. Let's see if it'll let me do it here. No, it don't want to do it. And this could be a limitation of Opera. But basically, this is a real kind of old school way of doing things where, like, you have the color, you have the color, and it's basically, well, it's probably just HTML instead of CSS. That's probably what it is. So if I go over here and go into HTML and go to body and go BG color equals Chuck Norris, it's at that point I get a color. Right, that's what it is. This is where I could also use Apple. Right, and this works because of the characters, right? And so what we see here is essentially replacing if I have Chuck Norris, what my browser does is it takes this, it divides it up evenly, and anything that it doesn't know, it converts to a 0. So it's C, 0, 0, C, K, or C, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Let's just rewrite that. C, 0, 0, C, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And so it's going to divide this up as evenly as it can, right? So in this case, it's got 11. So it's going to go 4, 4, and 3. And so we can see here, we take this value, and this is all my red value. This is all my green value. This is all my blue value. So we end up with this red background. Right, if we were to do that with, say, Apple, like we talked about earlier, we got an A here, we got an E here at the end, we divide that up, and we see we get a purple. Right, because Apple would convert to A, 0, 0, 0, E. So we would have red, green, add another 0 on the end to make it even, blue. And that's the word apple as a color. So I am going to remove this BG color here. I'm going to try to leave it here commented out so you all can like still see it and get it. Let's see, what would I need to do? I'll just I'll put the whole thing in a comment and then add the body color back. So I'll do and we'll do that, and I will add a little body background color is hashtag 5A40 AF here. So you guys can play with that when you get these files. Cool, cool. And we'll go back there and we'll go back to our demo in just a minute. I want to do another, something a little bit interesting, but I want to do it with a color palette after we talk about this. So I'm going to go through some of this pretty quickly so we can get back to that point. But it's the fact that there are different kind of color models. HSB, HSL, and HSV color models. And so there's the HSB color model, and that's hue, saturation, brightness. That's what you see if you use Photoshop. You see the hue, saturation, brightness color model. The one that's gained a lot of popularity in web development recently is HSL. And that's what we'll use for our final demo here in just a few moments. HSL stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. And you see the last thing here is the syntax for color, or for hue. Saturation and lightness in CSS. And so this makes a lot more sense to people. In this, we have 3 values. We have the hue value, which is the first value. It ranges from 0 to 360. We have the saturation value, which is your vibrancy of the color, right? It's either more saturated as a color or more dull as a color. And then we have the lightness color. So when you're thinking saturation, think shades of gray, adding gray to the color. When you're thinking lightness, think of adding white to the color or black to the color. And so the hue value goes from 0 to 360 in what we call the HSL color wheel. So we can see here our reds are around 0%. We could also use 360 for that. Yellows, greens, cyans, blues, magentas. Goes all the way around the wheel. And if you want to kind of shift your color value, you're shifting the value that you're using from 0 to 360 degrees. So if I want to use a yellow, I would say, well, it's HSL 60, 100, 100, or 150. Right, so normally when I do this, I like to do something a little bit interesting, and I like to talk about color pairings and different types of color, like, say, complementary color. Right, and when we're talking about color theory, complementary color is color that two colors that are across from one another on the color wheel are complements. So when we're looking at our HSL color wheel here, we see that blue is a complement to yellow. Magenta is a complement to green. And so one of the interesting things that we can do in a demo, and I'm going to make a new page here, and I'm going to link to it off of this index. So let's create an ahref equals /color template.html. And we'll call this color template site. And let's target that at blank. So it'll open in a new tab. All right, now this is so you all have an easier time using this when I send you your demo file. Let me create this HTML file now. It's color template.html. We'll add our skeleton. We'll change this to color template. Our title will be changed to color template. And we'll just do in-sheet styling. So we'll do in-head styling here. Style type equals text/CSS. We'll have that there. And let's just add a header, a main, and a body here really quickly. Or a footer, rather. Sorry. Header, main, and a footer. So what I want to do here is I want to work with my colors to create a color palette simply, quickly, and easily. And we're going to do that with variables. Right, so let's say here, let's make this easy to get to. Let's say here that I want my primary color of my website. So if we look at this color wheel, let's say if we want the main color of the website to be maybe somewhere right around here-ish. You know, somewhere in between blue and cyan. So let's go for a 200. Let's just say 200. Right, so on our I'm going to create a CSS variable that's going to be that main value. Right, so let's do let's do a colon root, and let's add main color. And so this can be anything, right? The dash indicates that it's a variable. Then it's anything that's not already in use by CSS. I'll even call it main color val. And we'll say that it is 200. So now when I go to style my body, and I go to set my background color, instead of putting a number here as my hue value, I'm going to put var main color val. Saturation will be 100%. Lightness will be 50%. And we'll save. And we forgot some stuff here. We need to do that, and we need to do that. Right, and so HSL, open parenthesis, var, main color value, that refers to our variable here, 150, and that gets us this background color. Pretty cool, right? So if we wanted to do some calculations here, I could actually take this and say, well, I want to know the opposite color of this. So it's 180 degrees across from it on the color wheel, because that's halfway around the circle, right? So I could make another variable here and call it second color val, and use the calc function in CSS and do var main color val minus 180. And so that's going to be its opposite on the other side of the color wheel. So if I wanted to take our header, we'll give it a height of, say, 10 VH, 10 viewport height, and a background color of HSL var second color val 100%, 50%, like so. I think I need spaces here. Oh, yep, I forgot a parenthesis. That's what my problem is. Add that parenthesis here. And take one away here. There. And there it is. That's our opposite color. Right, so if we go directly across from this blue on the color wheel, right, we could even pull up our color wheel that we were looking at a little bit ago and have a look. If we go directly across from roughly 200, which would be roughly right here, over to here, we hit orange, which is what we get there. And I could add the other stuff that we've kind of looked at before, right? Where we take our body HTML, margin, 0, padding, 0, right? To get rid of that little gap. Maybe I want to make that height a little taller there to make this header a little taller. So we'll make that 20 instead of 10. Let's make our main a min height of 60, viewport height, a background color of white, and a width of, say, 80%, margin 0, auto. And we can add our footer here too and give our footer the same style. Right, so now we have a site that looks like this. Right, orange header on the top, orange footer on the bottom, which is the opposite color of the light blue in the main background. And what's super neat here, right, is that this is always going to be a complementary color palette. If I were to say, I'll try to drag these around so you can see everything at once here. If I were to change this variable up here, and I were to say, you know what, I don't like that light blue as the main color anymore. I want to change that up, make it a little bit different. We can look at our color palette. We can see, oh, maybe I want it to be green instead. So let's go for like a 120. Just pure green. So I take that main color value, change that to 120. We'll save that. And we'll see all the colors update. That's pretty bright there, right? So that would be a point to where we might want to go change our saturation and lightness. Right, so maybe instead of 50, I want that to be 20. And then it's a lot darker. But I do like the original color that we had there, that 200 light blue value, so I'm going to bring that back. Another thing that you could do here, right, is you could do the little border bottom sort of trick that we've looked at previously. Where, say, let's add a border bottom. Or let's add it just to our header. So to our header, let's add a border bottom, 10px, solid. We can use that same main color val, right? So we can use this same color, put it here, and then just make it a little bit darker. So change that from 50 to say 20, and then we add that in. And then we have that little separation there, which is pretty cool. And it looks good. And you probably don't want to be doing all of this, so you probably want to put all of this as a variable up here somehow. So if I were, instead of having all of this, I'd make a, say, main color. And that's where I would put all of this. So now here, I would just have to put var dash dash main dash. Right, we can see if we drag it back over, nothing. So you can do that with basically anything. This is a good opportunity to also talk about other forms of color palettes, right? One of the ones that we look at in the module is a triadic color theme, right? Which is from 3 evenly spaced colors on a color wheel, or an analogous color scheme, which are colors side by side. So analogous would be, say, blue, cyan, and green, right? Because they're all side by side by side. Whereas red, blue, and green would be our triadic. And we could do the same sort of thing here. Right, so we could take this 200 here, and instead of subtracting 180, we would go a third of the way backwards, which is going to be 120. We could also make a third color val, which would be our variable color, our main value. Plus 120. So it's 120 forward and 120 backward. So now maybe we want to change that bar here to be our third color val. We would change it in the header, third color val. Maybe bump the lightness back up a little bit to 50. And we can see our colors change, right? We can see that this changed from a green to a green from that orange, right? Because instead of going all the way back to orange, we landed in the yellow-green. And we can see that that bar there becomes a magenta because we're going forward from that. So if we look at our color palette here, remember that we have our color that's roughly there. We go 120 up from that, which gets us roughly here. And we go 120 back from that, which gets us roughly here. These are all approximations, right? This magenta is actually more like here. As we can see that if we connect them, they are each roughly 1/3 of the color wheel, right? 120, 120, 120. 360 total. But of course, you might not want to, have something that's bright as your website color palette. And so that's where you come in and you mess with those saturation and lightness values. Maybe I don't want that green to be fully saturated. That bright, maybe I pull it down to say 70% saturation. Right? We could even pull down the brightness there. 25. All right, now we got a nice little earth tone. Maybe we take that primary blue there and we move it a little bit. Maybe we take it and, desaturate it a little bit, maybe down to 75%. Maybe bump the lightness up on that actually, so we get it more toward like a sky blue. Right, and then with that other color, we might want to dim that down a little bit as well. So maybe we just desaturate that a little bit. Maybe we desaturate it down to there. Right, I'm just kind of pulling these numbers up just out of my brain, right? Like, and so we get that, and that's a lot more subdued color palette. That's not smacking you in the face as much. It's still a very like spring, summery sort of color palette, but now we're entering into the fall, right? So maybe we want that primary color to be more in like the orange range. So if it's orange, we'd have this kind of flipped around. So this would be orange, and this would still be, this part would be green, and this part would be magenta. So let's kind of flip that around, maybe put that in, say, instead of 200, let's say 30. And that's going to change the entire color palette of my site. Same site, right? Haven't changed anything to that one number. Still have a triadic color palette here. So just changing that one value changes the entire look and feel of the entire site. And this is actually something that you can do with templating, which is pretty cool. Because now, like, I basically have one base site that I can use for multiple different things. And just kind of go in there and change that one number, maybe change some of the other numbers around, and have something really cool looking that I can just kind of spin up really quick. So just really quickly, let's talk about some of the other things that are related to this stuff, right? So color psychology, kind of a pseudoscience, right? Where we kind of have these associations with different colors. This also changes culturally, right? For example, you see the last two colors on the list here, black and white. Both of them have mourning as an association. In a lot of Western countries, United States, a lot of European countries, when you're in mourning, when somebody's passed, you wear black, but in actually a lot of Asian countries, you wear white. So a lot of this is going to change culturally. So this is another instance where, like, knowing your audience and knowing who you're trying to speak to in terms of the colors that you use is going to be super important. So these are just some associations that people get with these colors that you're seeing here. Red, anger, excitement, danger, orange, mental sharpness, autumn, yellow, harmony, could be anxiety, depending on the brightness, right? Like if you have a real dull yellow, some people don't really vibe with that. A nice bright one could be sunshine, green, soothing, and nature, and blue is tranquility. Peacefulness, also productivity, right? Which is why Microsoft Word is blue. Purple suggests royalty or creativity, right? And you just go over these color themes again really quickly. Different colors kind of working together around the color wheel. Monochromatic is all of one color. So basically we'd take one color on our color wheel and we'd just change that. Instead of changing the color value, the hue value, we would just be changing the saturation and lightness values. And so we can get multiple values of the same hue to get contrast. And this often looks, it's not really bright, it's not really garish, it's not really in your face, but it is elegant, it's calm, it's simple. A lot of people really like monochromatic color themes. I can basically just take and move that lightness up and down from 0 to 100. Have a few different lightness values in there for different purposes. Have a nice color theme. We looked at the complementary color theme. These are across from one another. You could also add different variants of hues and lightnesses in there. And then we talked about analogous and triadic. And I know I covered a lot of stuff really fast here. It's like I said, I can kind of talk about this stuff for hours and hours and hours on end, do demonstrations for hours and hours and hours on end. But we don't really have the time to do any of that today. So we'll stop and we'll see if anybody's with us. We'll pause for a moment and take some questions here. While we're kind of waiting on questions, I will push this to GitHub so I can send these files to you. All right, so now I can give you access to this site through these files. And since we're not seeing any questions here today, if you're watching the recording and you have any questions, please let me know. Send me an email or a Teams message. But that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.